Hey, what's going on, everybody? We've got another episode of Adventures in DevOps. I'm back this week. Hey, Warren, how's it going?
It's great. I didn't know if you were going to show up, so I was thinking about maybe having to do a second episode just by myself. I mean, I think last week went great. So
I was on an island in the South Pacific, so it went great for me as well. I have zero complaints.
I'm jealous. I'm gonna have to head over there myself. So I've got my fact of the week. I was over in Warsaw doing a cybersecurity short conference meetup, and I got questions whether or not using SaaS is secure. And I feel like it's an interesting proposition people bring up as a challenge, whether or not what you're building internally versus externally is more or less secure than that. And I find it really interesting that still lots of companies believe that somehow the engineers that you've hired are better than the ones that another company has hired. Now, for sure, it can be true sometimes, but I still feel like there's an overwhelming majority that keeps questioning this, which is really a surprise for me.
Yeah, so what you're saying there is that people are reinventing the wheel still because they don't trust SaaS. Is that the...
Yeah, for sure. Oh, I mean, it's a whole nother level on top of not invented here, right? It's oh yeah, that's
Yeah.
not secure. And I feel like it's just this abyss that you can fall into of believing that because we're doing it ourselves, we're gonna somehow do it better. It's gonna be more secure than another solution. I'm just like, show me where your interview process is that proves that the engineering team is definitely better. Because there's lots of good companies out there that have great interviewing processes, have great cultures, that are for sure building secure solutions.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and leveraging that. Right on.
I can,
Cool. Well,
may I interrupt? May I
absolutely.
suggest an opinion?
Yeah, bring it on.
Go for it.
I think I understand where people might be coming from. I don't think it's because they think that they're better engineers. I'm sure some of them do. But I think that there's some legitimate engineering consideration around isolation, right? Like, I think like as an engineer, you would say, okay, well, if it's like inside my AWS account and I control the boundaries of this account, the VPC, the IAM roles. An AWS account, as an example, is like an isolation boundary. And I think like there is something to say about going outside of that boundary into another, into another system. And so I think that maybe some of that sentiment comes from that isolation boundary, not necessarily from like, I didn't build it, so I don't trust it. I don't know.
Oh, no, for
Yeah.
sure. I feel like we should introduce our guest for today.
Right?
For
So
Annoying
that new voice that you just heard is our guest, Elad Ben Israel, former AWS, former Microsoft, the CEO and co-founder of Wing. And this is a cool fact. You created the AWS CDK, is that right?
Yeah.
Right. You're just so humble about it. You're like, yeah, of course I did.
Maybe
I mean,
he's trying
me
to
and
forget.
an amazing team at Amazon and AWS, yeah, it's really, really, really proud of this project. It's definitely been a really
For sure.
fun journey.
Yeah, just looking at your background here, it seems like it's been a fun journey, which I've always, I feel the same about my career, and I just think how amazing that is that I could spend 3 decades doing something and go, huh, that was pretty cool, man.
And continuing to be passionate about it and like
Right.
excited about it. I feel like, actually, I think Microsoft was the first time in my career where I stumbled into old geezers who are still doing software for a living and still writing code and still have this like childish enthusiasm after 40 years of programming, and got really inspired by that. I feel like that was like, as a young engineer, it was like, yeah, I can see myself doing this for a few more decades.
Oh, for sure. I agree. And I think that's super cool because a lot of people can't say that. And I know for sure if I were in a different career, I may not be as excited about it. So I think it's really, really cool that we can do that.
Well, now I'm worried that the first job you get out of university or, get into the professional environment, whoever is around you is going to dictate where your inspiration and how you think about work goes on for the rest of your professional life. And that scares me a bit because I feel like there were way too many jaded engineers at the early on places where I worked.
I don't think it would dictate it. I think like anything in life, you find your role models during your journey, and you identify them when they're the right role models, right? Like not necessarily when they're the first ones that you encounter.
Yeah, I can say from my perspective that a lot of the mentors and role models that I had over my career, it wasn't until years and sometimes decades later that I realized that they were mentors and role models.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think it's well defined. And I also think that the corollary problem here is you're not really talked to or taught about how to find a role model or why you might want to find one or what that even looks like and how it can help you. I feel like at one point in your career, people start popping up and be like, oh, it would probably be good if I had one of these. Maybe. How do I get one?
Where's the app? Where's the app where I can sign up?
Yeah, exactly.
You joke, but I'm sure there's one out there now, like find your tech mentor, right? And go on there.
Actually, I think both Microsoft and Amazon had internal systems for matching you with the mentor. So it's not makes sense.
Right. The AI has automatically selected your mentor. Please click continue.
Why is that?
It has Scarlett Johansson's. It has Scarlett Johansson's voice.
Right. Cool. So, aside from mentoring and SaaS and careers, what is Wing? I'm curious about that because I kind of have a little bit of an idea, but I want to hear it straight out of your mouth. Tell us what Wing is.
Yeah, we're also like learning how to talk about it, like as the project evolves. So it's you probably have a different mind. It would be interesting to like hear what I think that the way I'm thinking about it is, spent some time at AWS, built the CDK, built some internal distributed systems at Amazon, and been constantly obsessed about developer experience and developer productivity and iteration speed, because to me as a developer, that's like the most important piece of like my experience is my ability to iterate. Mm-hmm. And after leaving Amazon, I was like, okay, so it still feels crappy to build stuff on the cloud for some reason. I mean, I love the CDK, and I think like it took us many steps forward, but something didn't feel like we've really solved the problem. I was thinking, well, the cloud is going to be here for the foreseeable future. We're going to continue to build stuff on this new kind of platform, but something is still a bit broken. And it took me some time to untangle, like what are the big pains, or where the kind of the root causes of this friction that we feel. I think like everybody I talk to kind of resonates with that friction, but no, I think like people perceive that it's coming from different reasons. And the way I'm thinking about it, my perception of this is that there are two main problems. One is the fact that that developers, when you're looking at a system like the cloud, there are two engineering disciplines that are required in order to deliver something to the cloud. One is the infrastructure discipline, or the DevOps discipline, or the IT ops, or the system administration, and the other is the application developers. And as much as we would love a world where all applications developers would also be passionate about IP routing tables, and I think some of us are, which is tantalizing sometimes, because I'm one of those. And so for me, like having like a full understanding of the stack is is fun, and I enjoy it, and I enjoyed learning how to configure VPCs and how to like set up EC2 instances. But most application developers are focused and passionate about the problem domain that they're solving for, which is usually the business problem domain or the customers of their business. And these are two different engineering domains in terms of like the problem space.
Right.
And I think what I've seen with the CDK, and I think a little bit of the blind spot we had with the CDK, especially given Amazon's and AWS's engineering culture, which is very much on the kind of like full stack DevOpsy, everybody's a DevOps side of the spectrum, is that developers don't really want and are really struggling to understand all the mechanics of the cloud. And in reality, when you look at organizations, they don't really want their developers to fully understand all the mechanics of the cloud. And so one of the problems that I've seen is that developers they don't have access to this new type of computer. They access in terms of like cognitive barrier, learning barrier, and in some cases also like they're not allowed to touch the cloud, right? Like it's like, this is the DevOps team, this is the platform stuff. You just do your container. I kind of sometimes think about it like we've containerized the developers. Just put them inside the container, and this is the cloud. Don't worry about it. Just write your code, and the cloud you don't have to care about it. And I think it's a shame because the beauty of the cloud is infrastructure, is the ability to leverage managed services to achieve your goals. And the more you're leaning on that system, the more you're leaning on these services, the less you give developers independence, and the less you give developers the ability to actually like iterate quickly and choose the right tools and understand how they're leveraging this new type of technology. And so to me, that was like the fundamental realization, is that the cloud is not ready for developers in a sense. And I think what we've seen is that, or what we're seeing is that organizations are trying to kind of, again, they containerize the developers, they create these like big platforms and complex workflows, and this Helm chart, so go and change this one line if you want to add an API endpoint, but you can't really test it because we need to deploy it on the cluster in order for you to actually see that it's working. But don't worry, it's going to be fine. And it's not fine sometimes, and I think you guys know what I'm talking about, right? And so basically trying to solve this problem, right? Like it's like, how do we give developers access to this new type of computer? And it's a huge challenge, I feel, because I think what happened is that the cloud is, we've raced to the cloud in a sense, and as an industry, and we've basically carried with us a lot of the tools and approaches that worked for us in the data center and in traditional computing, that like the programming languages and the abstractions and the deployment systems, and we ended up with like something that's not optimized for this type of platform. And so what we've been doing with Wing in the past few years is trying to distill how to address this pain. And I think like one of the kind of like maybe a bit of a recent coin drops I had, or the recent kind of observations I had, was that the thing that we're missing is an abstraction layer, is this decoupling between application and platform that we have in traditional software, and we've developed in traditional software. Like I used to write code in the 90s, and we didn't have that decoupling. I had to know which file system I'm using in order to write files, and I had to know how to store, create like TSR programs in order to do some memory, background, stuff that runs in the background, and like do some time switching. And so again, I love this. I've always been attracted to this, but now today, when you want to do these things, you really don't have to understand how your platform works, right? Like you really don't have to know which file system you're using in most cases, and which operating system you're using, right? Like we have established a bunch of layers that allow developers to be effective on this platform called a computer, right? A computer that runs inside a machine. And my realization was that we need this layering for the cloud, because without this layering, we keep bumping into each other, right? Like these disciplines the friction keeps happening. And what we've been doing with Wing is basically we've established this abstract cloud API as a foundation for solving this problem. And I think there's a timing aspect to this, because the cloud as a platform is maturing over time, and I believe we're at the stage where we can identify the primitives, and even identifying them from the bottom in a sense. It's not necessarily saying, I'm going to be able to like give you all the primitives you ever need. It's basically saying, let's give you more primitives. I'll give you an example of what I mean about this. You know what? Basically what I'm trying to say is that it's pretty safe. There are some primitives that we know that are very valuable. Like for example, a container, right? Being able to execute a container, run a container, in a scalable way. And I think Kubernetes had basically said, yeah, here's your primitive. And it's been very, very successful in exactly that, right? Like it's basically saying, if you need to run containers, Kubernetes gives you exactly this abstraction that you need. And it's become super successful because it was able to identify this one primitive that can hold an application on the cloud. But in my mind, it's very low level, and it still means that you're not really able to leverage the cloud, right? Like you're leveraging VMs maybe, right? Which is
right.
Super powerful, super valuable. But again, if you need storage, for example, then okay, go manage hard drives and memory, manage and scale your volumes and backup and replication and like. But hey, guys, there's like 1,000 people team at Amazon that's managing object storage and S3. Maybe we can use this service instead of doing this ourselves, right? And so even just saying, let's take object storage as another primitive. It's pretty ubiquitous. It exists in every cloud provider. It even exists as a self-hosted Kubernetes, solution if you need it. And let's define the abstraction layer of this idea called a bucket or object store. And I think we know how to do this. I think anybody can pretty much define, okay, we need to be able to put files and get files and download multi-part downloads and uploads and MIME types. And there's a surface area that's pretty easy to like identify, and say even just adding this one primitive to your toolbox of abstract cloud primitives can really help, right? I've talked to many people, and especially people who use Kubernetes that are kind of like worried about taking too much dependency on their cloud provider, but they still have a bucket, right? Like they still need a bucket, which is anecdotally, it's actually AWS's first service, right? Like AWS's first service that's free. So taking step by step, basically saying, okay, let's talk about object store and define this abstract API and start building our applications on top of this abstract API, which is decoupled from the concrete implementation. Again, super simple exercise, not super hard to do. And the other thing that we're doing with Wing is we're actually also providing a simulator implementation for those resources. Because again, if I define the contract for a bucket, put, get, list, whatever, it's pretty easy to implement it locally. It's obviously not highly available and replicated and all that stuff, but like from a functional perspective, I can actually test my application now and I can iterate. And so this is basically the exercise that we've started doing. It's like, okay, let's take buckets and queues and topics and static websites and secrets, and basically slowly kind of like adding more tools to the arsenal of tools that are the foundation, they're the standard library in a sense of the cloud. And
So let me pause you right there and say, so if I'm following you correctly, you're thinking about application development in terms of just the primitives as far as like, okay, I need compute, I need file storage, I need database. And so instead of forcing the application developers to think about the individual characteristics of those because of the chosen provider, just abstracting that away to say, look, you need file storage. Okay, here's the interface for putting files, here's the interface for getting files. How that happens because you're using AWS or GCP or NetApp or whatever doesn't matter. Is that right? Am I following you right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right on.
And I think like the heavy lifting that we're doing on our side is testing, right? It's basically saying, oh, here's an implementation for AWS, here's an implementation for Azure, here's an implementation for the simulator. It's heavy lifting because I can't expect every platform team across the industry to actually do all this heavy lifting across multiple resources, across all the different types of cloud providers. And obviously we're doing this with the community. It's like an open source project. And so we start to see people fill up little boxes in this matrix of compatibility. And the thing that this does in terms of solving the original problem, there are two things basically. One is a higher level API, which is based on the mental model of the application and not on the mental model of the infrastructure. And because when a developer uses a bucket, they understand the semantics of this, the functional semantics of this resource. Even today, right? Like when they're using S3, they understand, okay, so I'm putting objects on this service and there's some constraints related to the fact that it's a distributed system. Like all those things are easy for developers to understand. They're not that's not the hard part. The non-functional aspects of the bucket, Wing actually has this like pluggable, customizable backend model. And so we provide some default implementation, but then platform teams can actually like customize that default implementation and provide their own implementation or a customized implementation of our bucket. And so, for example, we have this customer who it's actually a really cool example. Like we have this resource called API, which is basically like so we have this resource called API, which is basically an API gateway. So you can specify routes, and then you can specify the handlers. How each route, how you respond to each route. And our default implementation at the time, for the time being, is using for AWS is using API gateway and Lambda functions, because it's the simplest implementation to get started with. And we have a customer who basically said, well, we're not allowed to use API gateway because some compliance, security, some financial institute. And they created an implementation of this API resource that uses load balancer and a monolithic container, right, behind the scenes. And you didn't have to change anything about the programming model. Like from the developer's perspective, they just specified a bunch of routes and a bunch of handlers. And the way these guys are going to be deployed with this particular cloud environment is using a load balancer and a long-running container. Great. And so I think this decoupling offers both the developers the ability to actually understand what they're doing, right? Like it's not just like change this one line here, this Terraform, and yeah, it's HCL, it's this thing, don't worry about it. It's now like talking in their language. Also gives the platform teams and DevOps teams the ability to focus on their responsibility, because it's not like we're saying there's no need for DevOps or there's no need for people who are experts in on the problem domain of the infrastructure, on the problem domain of the system. It's always been needed, right? Like for software. So that's
Yeah,
one.
for sure.
And then the second side is like the simulation, which I think is really shifting the developer experience to the left in a sense. It's like the cloud is not that you don't need the cloud in the loop when you're iterating, which is
And probably don't want it there, even if it is in the loop.
yeah. I mean, I think developers are really spoiled and legitimately so, right? Like they
for
want to
sure.
work on their ID, they want their debugger. This is their, this is their craft, right? Like their craft is like to change some code and check that it's working and change it again and check again and change again and then write a little unit test. And like you want to be able to do these iterations really, really quickly. And even if it takes like 30 seconds or a minute, it's too long. At least in my standards.
I mean, you said a bunch of really interesting things there, and I feel like there's three that really come to mind. And the first one is there's an aspect of the container world, which I think started with Docker, then Kubernetes, that has really failed us. It just the interface that you have to understand in order to deploy your technology in one of these environments requires. I mean, it's better than it was. It took the interface that we had, which was the operating system, and sort of adjusted it by like, say, 90-degree angle. It's still the same. It's still the same thing in a lot of ways, but maybe there's a more consistency in what we're getting. And I feel like that's in a way something that we lost. We had the DevOps movement. Everything's supposed to be under one roof. Everything's supposed to be understood together. And if anything, we didn't achieve that. We didn't get in that direction with the tools. We just, said, oh yeah, we have the mindset. And I feel like this is an opportunity. You start talking about primitives here that we actually need. And I feel like that's where AWS was really successful compared to the other cloud providers. You start out with S3, a huge release was Lambda successfully, and then API Gateway. I mean, these to me are the primitives that you're even talking about. And that's where the success came from. Everything else is like, what is that even? And if we take it another step further, we can see companies like Render or Netlify, Vercel, that are trying to create an abstraction layer on top of the cloud to make it simpler. But I feel like it's, almost what we're saying is it's too opinion based, right? You're losing the aspect of how to deliver value from the underlying resources that are there, block store, et cetera, by offering a too opinionated answer. Like if you need to dive down, you can't get that. So both early on, we didn't succeed because we didn't figure out what the primitives were. And we also have two over-opinionated platforms. It'd be great if we could redefine what that real interface is at the platform level, at the cloud provider level, so that what you need at the application makes sense. I mean, even Lambda, you have to know that you're using Lambda in AWS in order to deploy your software, right? You can't just be like, I don't want to think about this and go to town. Your only alternative is containers today.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I think the vertical platforms like Heroku, Vercel, Render, they're able to create a really great developer experience by completely narrowing down the surface area and saying, okay, we're just going to give you the ability to deploy websites or to deploy containerized applications, and in that sense, it's great. It's solving the problem, right? In that sense, because for those use cases, you really get an amazing experience. Well, what we're trying to do with Wing is we're trying to actually create like a general purpose solution, not necessarily a vertically integrated solution, but more of like any programming environment where you're able to actually pick and choose which tools you want to use for your solution. And we are actually working on a delivery experience that will be very similar to what Render offers and Vercel offers, but works on top of this foundation. So it's not limited to, just delivering websites or containers.
It almost makes me think of like an infrastructure approach implemented with Go interfaces, because like if you have a Go interface, you can swap out anything that matches the same interface specification. So underneath, if your logging provider matches the interface and you want to swap that out, you can just swap it, and there's no impact to that. No one knows the difference except for the people who are required to maintain that. And it sounds like you're taking that to an infrastructure approach. If you need a storage bucket, here's the interface for it, and who the actual provider that is doesn't matter. You can swap it out daily if that's what makes you happy. As long as it matches the interface, you're good to
And
go.
especially with the buckets, you have to also move all the data across all the implementation.
Oh, you're not going to handle that part automatically?
No.
No.
That's the support team's problem, not mine.
No, I think that's a very apt, very aware of the problem. I mean, just for those that haven't used Go versus other compiled languages, you have to define the interfaces that a class implements. Not just here are the methods, but explicitly that it implements an interface. And in Go, you actually don't have to define the interface in order to pass an object around and inject it in, as long as all the properties of that class actually match. So, I think that's spot on realistically here.
Yeah, there are many versions of this, I think, in software design. And dependency injection is like something that exists in almost every programming environment, and it's at the heart of what we're doing, right? Like you're able to basically inject the dependency and say, okay, in this case, I want to use my bucket instead of the standard bucket. Yeah, I agree. I think we know how to do this as an industry. We're not inventing the wheel in the sense of like completely new design paradigms.
Right.
But I think like there's a. I think going and doing it, right? Like going and saying, this is the API that we think is the right API. That's a really big challenge, because designing good APIs is an art and science thing, right? Like, and this is one of the reasons we're doing this as an open source project, because we believe that this is something that needs to be baked with the community, baked with use cases, baked with the real world. We don't have the oracle and knowledge of like exactly how to do this, and so I think like doing this in the open and collaboratively is the right way to do something like that.
For sure. And you've been working on this for a couple years now, is that right?
Yeah.
Cool. How's the community support been from that? Because like with open source projects, that's I think that's the challenge, is like getting people to make it a two-way conversation. How has that experience been for you?
It's been amazing, to be honest. I feel I learned a lot from my experience, building the CDK, and kind of like being not, in a way, a bit not very intentional about the community that's built around the CDK, but observing the organic kind of evolution of it. And then coming into Wing was like, okay, I kind of know what are the important things about creating a community like that. Yeah. And we've really made a lot of effort to kind of put that in place very early in the project, and it really pays off, right? Like the fact that I feel Wing is a really, really great project to contribute to, and I'm not saying that. I really do think it's just a good experience as a contributor, right? Like you have a really good, really reasonable documentation. Definitely always can improve the documentation, but reasonable documentation. The build environment and the development environment is pretty easy to use, and it's a pretty complex project. So, being able to actually get that right took us quite a lot of iterations. We're trying to be very responsive. The community is very welcoming and very helpful, and we publish good first issues. And there's a bunch of things that you can do even things like, I'll just give you an anecdotal example. There's this two really simple things that you can do to really improve the experience of contributors. One is whenever someone submits a pull request, send them a note, send them a comment. Acknowledge that there's someone on the other side. That's like, it's a dopamine rush, right? Like it's like,
for sure.
Someone saw me, right? Saw that I'm here. And then the other one is that once the feature or the fix that they contributed was released, add a comment to the pull request that says, this was released in version V2, blah, blah, blah. and just getting that, like closing the cycle and giving people the acknowledgement that what they've contributed is now a public release and everybody can use it, is really gratifying for contributors. I can say that as, from firsthand experience, right? Like for me, when I'm contributing. And so these two things can be pretty much automated, right? Like you really don't have to be super, it doesn't require a lot of efforts, but it does require intention to put them in place. And once you put them in place, like even for me, when I'm submitting PR to our repo and I get this little note that says it was released in version XYZ, it just feels good.
For sure. That's something that I think is worth acknowledging and mentioning, because that's the people side of writing good software. And it's something that we can easily get defocused from, that there are people at the other end of this. And so I think that's super cool to just acknowledge them. And you're right, it's a 100% dopamine hit.
Yeah.
I mean, you can look at it actually too from just a statistical value-driven standpoint. Your software isn't delivering value or the changes that you make until someone's using it. And if they don't know that the changes that you deployed, you've worked so hard to get out, aren't there, or what they've done. There are so many open source projects that you don't know when it's going to be released after you put in a pull request. I mean, my strategy now is first I start with the issue. I'd be like, this is a problem. Is someone, like if I submit a pull request, will it get merged?
Yeah.
And 99% of the time, I never hear back. There is like, sometimes I hear back within 6 months, which is just so ridiculous to me. Frequently I hear back within
That's agile, baby.
Agile is 30 days. I hear back from their bot saying no one's put a comment on this thing for 30 days. We're going to close it automatically. I'm like, thank you.
Yeah, and again, I think like we can definitely, there's things we can improve, but at least we're trying to be intentional about those things. I mean, I remember from the CDK at some point, it is really hard to maintain a big open source project. And one of the problems with this is that there's an asymmetry between the capacity you have with the team, with the core team, which is usually a fixed size or maybe growing a little bit every year, and the user base, which is sometimes exponentially growing or sometimes growing like crazy, and the contributor base as well. And if you don't have automation, if you don't have like really great workflows for like accepting contributions and dealing with them, it's just immediately, very quickly gets overwhelming for the core team. And the CDK is still, I think, really struggling with this because AWS keeps growing. There's like more and more services, more and more capabilities. The CDK definitely is perfect for contribution in that sense. It's like, oh yeah, they added this new feature in Lambda, let's just expose it in the CDK. So it's like these are really simple contributions, and so people can really participate. But you need someone to review this. You need someone to accept it. You need someone to, and so it's a challenge. It's a big challenge with big projects. So definitely, I can also be empathetic to the other side in that sense. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, for sure. So so with Wing, you've got that problem, but also with the other cloud providers as well, because you are supporting all the different cloud providers, right? Or I guess we can't say all, because I don't even know what all really means in the cloud space.
We just had someone requested a Cloudflare backend for Wing, right? Which is interesting.
Oh yeah,
right. They seem to have all the primitives we need now to build the standard library. And we also don't have full support for all the kind of traditional providers. As I said, it's kind of like a matrix that we're filling up. We have the foundation for testing everything, which is really important. So like if you fill up something, it goes into the factory and starts, and we start testing it every time there's a change. And it's interesting to think about the cloud agnostic problem, which is, I haven't mentioned it actually, but in a way, not in a way, but Wing also solved that problem, right? Like, because once you work against this abstraction, then suddenly you're portable. Your application can be ported across different implementations. Like you said, I can change the bucket, I can change the cloud provider, and I've been talking to like tons of people from the industry in the past 2 years, and this is a growing pain. It feels like I'm seeing more and more people concerned about portability, both from a cost perspective. Just talked to someone yesterday, and they mentioned they've been an AWS shop for many years, and at some point it just became really expensive, and AWS wouldn't give them any discounts, and so they said, okay, we're going to move some of our workloads to GCP or to Azure. I think I don't remember what it was, but just pointing out that I think like as the cloud is evolving and people have bigger workloads and more stakes, then the fact that the power is in the hands of the vendor as opposed to being in the hands of the user is I feel like it's not good for the industry eventually, right? Like it's not good for anyone. And Wing is solving that problem. Again, still early, still have a lot of work to do, but like at least architecturally, this is a solution to this problem. And I'm seeing more and more people talk about this. I think the other anecdotally, like Warren, like kind of related to what you asked earlier, I'm seeing a lot more vendors wanting to support self-hosted solutions because of those concerns about data, where the data is stored and going out of your account, and so those examples are like they're not SaaS providers. They're vendors that create services, but they want to be able to deploy them in customer accounts across different cloud providers. And right now, the only reasonable solution, which I don't actually think it's like it's not real in a sense, is to use pure Kubernetes.
Right.
And the reality of that is actually pretty harsh, because first of all, you're really limited in terms of like the resources that you can use outside of your Kubernetes cluster. So once you need a bucket, then okay, we need this abstraction again. And two is Kubernetes, as much as we wanted to think about it as like cloud agnostic and portable, and the reality is that the distributions are very different. The versioning are different. The VMs are different. The VM types are different. The volumes are different. The managed, Kubernetes solutions are different. And so you end up having to like actually test. Yes, this works with the GCP Kubernetes and with the AWS Kubernetes, and so even this is not truly. So the only portable thing in this world is the container in a way, or
right.
your application that's running inside Kubernetes, which is a bit unfortunate, I feel, because I know that a lot of people are using Kubernetes with the sense of cloud portability, and then when they actually need it, it's much harder than they expect.
For sure, because you end up. Oh, go ahead, Warren.
I would say you heard it here first. If you're using Kubernetes for cloud portability, stop it. You're not getting the value out.
For sure, because it's been a slow transition like that, because as Kubernetes has matured, you see like little things that steer you towards a cloud agnostic or a cloud specific solution. Like whenever you set up your ingress for your service, if you're in GCP, you use one type of ingress, or if you're using the Amazon managed Kubernetes, you'll use a different ingress, and then you try to move it to a different Kubernetes cluster, and you're like, damn it, I screwed that pooch.
And then you end up with like overlays and templates and patching and different taints, and I don't even know all the. I just wanted to make sure that I think Kubernetes is a really great and powerful tool. I think that oftentimes people use it without really needing all this power and these capabilities. And oftentimes people use it because they think that they're not going to be locked to a cloud provider, but that's not really. but I've seen amazing use cases of Kubernetes, and I think definitely, by the way, people who need on-prem container orchestration, right? Amazing, right? I don't know that there's a better solution for that. I don't know, Warren
I'm totally with you on that. I mean, I'll say the controversial thing, which is I believe there's probably 1% of the use cases are Kubernetes, and the 99% you probably don't need that. I feel like from experience, it's something related to GPUs or on-prem. If you need to deploy a very high cardinality number of containers with minor tweaks to the variables or parameters for each of those containers, then for sure 100% Kubernetes. Nothing else is going to give you that level of control with the repeatability. I just find that, as you said, there's hypothetical value associated with portability or cross-platform. Same way, if we use Terraform, we'll just be able to immediately change clouds just like that with our infrastructure. I think it's for sure the same mistake, but at the application level. That's my highly controversial opinion. I'm not going to get my mind changed anytime soon, but feel free to write me some letters to my email.
Yeah, I would also add that the ecosystem that's evolved around Kubernetes is amazing. And I think a lot of people use Kubernetes because of that ecosystem, because they have great tools in Kubernetes that enable them to do observability and CI/CD and Warren, I see you also have another take.
Yeah, I know, right? This is gonna be a hot take episode. I think that there was a controversial AI developer, Devin, who I'm sure everyone is aware of at this point, and I feel like it's very difficult to separate out core problem solving from solving problems that were created by the infrastructure or architecture that you've picked. So ideally, if you're using a cloud provider, you don't need to monitor and observe what's going on there. If you're using Kubernetes, you for sure do. So yes, all the great tools for observability only work with Kubernetes because you need them to work. Otherwise, you're like, what is going on in my infrastructure stack?
What's wrong with me? Why don't I need to use all these cool observability tools?
Yeah,
be with the cool kids. No, I think it's interesting.
I mean, you definitely get left out, right? Because you're not using that thing. I hear very frequently we can't use Lambda or Cloud Functions or even Cloud Run because they don't offer the same sort of integration. I mean, I think the truth is almost everything offers OTel integration at this point. So, forget that. That's no longer the truth. But for sure, you just don't need to integrate with things because the hope is that you don't need to. And I imagine, with Winglang, you're writing stuff in a way that is agnostic, and you also hopefully don't need to know I don't know, maybe I'm saying too much. I assume, some sort of observability backend configuration or integration exists in some way.
It exists in our roadmap. It doesn't exist yet, but it definitely exists in our roadmap. We do want OTel to be built in to Wing, which is actually really exciting. I can't wait to get there.
I know a lot of people are jumping for joy over the fact of, I get that for free now, and I don't have to write a whole bunch of things to run a sidecar.
Yes, right.
Actually, it's really timely because there was just a huge vulnerability discovered in FluentBit. I think literally today, where there's a huge problem there, and anyone running it, there's remote code execution vulnerability that you need to go and patch.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess I know what I'm doing this afternoon.
I don't know.
Vacation's over.
Right?
I mean, someone literally asked a question, is it worse than Log4j? So still being determined.
Oh, wow. The fact that you have to pause to answer that question is not a great indicator.
Disconcerting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned that OTel's on your roadmap. What else is on your roadmap for Wing?
One of the pieces of the solution is what we call the Wing console, which is this graphical user interface that allows you to interact with your cloud application. And again, it starts from the developer, from the inner loop, right? Because we're running inside a simulator. And so now you want to be able to see that when you put something in the bucket, it's actually there, and send a request through the API or put some message in the queue and see that it's behaving the way you want it and run your tests. And so it's kind of like this, currently like a development tool. But one of the things that we're working on is getting the same view to connect to your production system. And I think that I'm really excited about this, because one of the cool things about this view is that it has a logical model of your application. So if you design your application, and every developer designs their application through composition, right? They say, okay, I'm taking my problem, I'm breaking it down to smaller pieces, and each piece solves a certain part of the problem, and there's like interfaces, and I can test each piece in isolation, blah, blah, blah. But then you compose things together, and it becomes this like tree, right? So you have like your application, and then your ingress system, and your storage system, and your outbound connector, and whatever, right? Like, so you basically create some kind of a hierarchical logical structure. And one of the things that I've seen with the CDK, and the CDK also allows you to do that. Like CDK has this concept called constructs that basically allow you to compose smaller, compose constructs together into higher level abstractions. And one of the things that I've seen with the CDK is that people are a bit reluctant to use these constructs to create logical abstractions, because they're lost when the system is deployed. So you have this beautiful view, right, of your system and all these logical units, but then you end up deploying them, and they break down to their atoms, in a sense, right? Like they break down and become queues and buckets and containers and topics, and like you're unable to have like this logic. You don't have this logical view of your system anymore, and so this console, being able to actually see the same logical view in production, and being able to like reason about your application in production the same way you reason about it during development, the same way you wrote your code, and having this traceability between something that happened in production on the cloud and the logical unit in the code that actually, I have this queue filled up. Okay, so this is a low-level error, but then if I understand that this queue belongs to some certain piece of the system, I can react much quickly. I can understand exactly who's responsible for this. I can diagnose problems much better, and so that's another thing that we're working on that I think it's good.
I feel like that's something that definitely not to skip over. Like when you're using stuff like the CDK, it's a bunch of transformation steps. And so one of the transformations, you lose sort of all of the metadata that happens in the step before it. CDK turns into CloudFormation templates, which ends up in AWS, and it's like one directional. That basically means you have a bidirectional view. You're able to look at what's actually deployed in production, combine it with the metadata that's that you've written for Wing, and see that picture from the outside without needing AWS to make fundamental changes to their tagging system, or I'm sure there's some clever ways of getting that metadata in so you can pull it back out later, but they don't have to make changes to the cloud in order to directly be able to support this view, which is what would need to happen with stuff like the CDK or even Terraform, which doesn't command or really look into your production cloud environment to understand what's going on. It's just one direction, transform after transform until you're there.
Yeah, it's kind of leaky in that sense, right? Like it's basically the abstraction is leaking out, and also in many cases you have different people involved in the operations of the system, and so not having like a shared mental model of the system is sometimes a huge problem. And I think what people do is like they use tagging, they create dashboards. A dashboard sometimes is basically just a way to restore some logical view, right? They say, oh, all of these resources belong to this part of the system. And so now when I'm looking at the dashboard, I understand that something happened in this part of the system. But with Wing, you really don't have to do this manually, because we know all this information from your code, which is exciting.
I feel like AWS actually tried to go in this direction a little bit, but then clearly didn't get it turned into a product or a service in the AWS's view, which is like, I don't want to see the underlying primitives, as you put it, here. Like I want to see the service components and the architecture that I've deployed as I understand it. When I go to the homepage of AWS console, I want to see my individual services laid out there that I can click on directly and not be like, oh wait, this service is made up of a container plus it's running in Kubernetes and then there's these other things. Like I just want to see one blob and I can click on it and it will tell me data's fine, logs are great, monitoring, observability, everything's great there, connections in and out, HTTP, good, right? Flows, fantastic. I don't want to have to jump into those underlying primitives to understand them.
Yeah, agreed. I think a lot of them went too far with that. Like they tried to show that, but then in doing so, they ended up showing, like, oh, here's the 400 security groups that were created as a result of this template. And like, okay, thanks, but really, really not helpful, man.
Yeah, I mean, I can also be empathetic to AWS's side of the world in that sense, because one of the beautiful things about Amazon, and really, for me, it was just incredibly empowering, is this two pizza team model. I'm assuming it's basically like this operational model of the company that says, there's a small team that's responsible for a certain type of product delivered to customers. They just obsess about making these customers happy, and it's real. And the empowerment is real. Like the ability of that team to actually make decisions and deliver without interruption I haven't seen that anywhere. And I think one of the results of this is that it's really hard to create like a holistic view, right? I think as customers, both AWS, you actually also see this in the Amazon website, right? You go to an Amazon product page and there's 11,000 services involved in rendering this page. Right. And it's horrible, right? It's clear that nobody has this holistic intention about how this needs to look, but it's good enough, and it's very valuable to customers, and I think this is same kind of DNA, Amazon DNA, that's leaking out to the experience, because Amazon is really intentional about this trade-off. It's saying we prefer that teams would have independence, because otherwise it's just with such a big organization with so many services and so many teams, just becomes a standstill at some point if you have to go. So I can see why.
I can't even imagine what that would look like if you had every developer at Amazon had to go through a single infrastructure team to build something. Well, what would it take, 6 months to get a PR through?
There's a couple of other cloud providers out there who may be following that model, and maybe that's what it looks like.
Yeah.
I mean, I see Wing as this imagine AWS worked exactly as it did, but there are a couple of things that are cross-cutting that just solve, everyone's oh, how can tags not be ubiquitous, right? There are a couple of things like that which would really make the developer experience so much better, and I feel maybe it's Wing that's giving you that.
I think the way we kind of circumvent the challenge is by reducing the surface area, right? Because trying to do this across 180 services of AWS is not reasonable, right? Especially not for a small startup. It's not also reasonable for a team at AWS. I think one of the challenges we've had with the CDK and constantly having with the CDK, and I think CloudFormation is also having this challenge, is basically racing AWS and making sure there's coverage for all the research, for the capabilities and new features and new services that spin up every year. And so what we've done with Wing is said, okay, hold on for a second. Let's see what's the foundation that is good enough to build the majority of the applications, or a good chunk of the applications, and create a really great developer experience for that. And it is a very extensible kind of ecosystem play that we're doing, and so you can actually create libraries, and we have people starting to publish libraries for Wing, and so it is designed to offer you a general purpose solution. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to focus on the foundation. I think it's a reverse pyramid, and I think one of the problems with AWS is kind of architectural philosophy is that there's no pyramid. Internally at AWS, all services are created equal. So S3 and RoboMaker are basically the same, has the same kind of, place in the architecture, right? Like it's kind of like it's a mesh of services as opposed to being like a stack. And I think like not having a stack makes it really hard for AWS's teams to prioritize and say, okay, these are part of the foundational stack. Let's make sure that we get it. In practice, this is what happens, right? Like in practice, when we started the CDK, we've created an S3 abstraction API. We've actually done that. But I think when you don't have that architecturally, then you can't really build holistic experiences based on that stack, and then that's what we're trying to do with Wing. I don't know if that made sense. It felt a bit philosophical.
Sometimes it just goes that way. So from a practical perspective, what does it look like to get started with Wing? Like if I have my application and it's already built and running, but I'm signing off on this new approach, what's the transition project or transition process look like for saying I'm going to use Wing to do that, and how do I get started?
So first of all, it's open source, and go to winglang.io and you can download it and install it and run it on your machine, and it's free, and you get the simulator and the console and everything. And and that's actually an interesting, it's a more interesting question, I think, that maybe we want it to be at this point. But what we've started to do with Wing is we basically said we want to start from the ideal experience.
Right.
We want to put that in place. And so what we've done is we actually created a programming language. We haven't talked about this, but we've actually created a programming language that has these ideas baked into the language, and it's built on top of this standard library. It's built on top of this set of abstractions, but it also has this really cool thing called in-flight functions. And the idea of in-flight functions is kind of like async functions in traditional languages, only that in-flight functions not only run later in time, they also run in a different place. So you can actually package them and ship them to the cloud. And what you could do with in-flight functions is basically represent the application logic, the runtime behavior of your system within the same programming model that you're describing the cloud resources that you're using. So you can basically say new bucket, new queue, new container, and then you can basically specify the code that's running inside the container in the same programming space, or new function, new Lambda function. And the cool thing about this is that, when you write this code, this in-flight code, you can interact between your in-flight and your pre-flight resources. So you can basically say bucket.put. And when this is basically compiled, it compiles to Terraform or to any other target platform. As I said, right, like it's a customizable thing. So we actually have an AWS CDK platform that can be deployed through CloudFormation, and we have someone asking about cross-plane platform, which is interesting, right? Like basically compiled to Kubernetes YAMLs and deployed through Kubernetes. But when you compile to this target platform, the compiler is able to basically bind your runtime code with your infrastructure. And so it basically says, okay, so you need to be able to put file in the bucket. Great, I need to know the name of the bucket. Let's say I'm on S3, I need to know the bucket name, and I need the IAM permissions. These IAM permissions in order to actually deliver this application code. And so you get this really, really, really nice end-to-end holistic experience. But what we're realizing, and I guess it's pretty obvious, but what we're doing right now is we're basically starting to offer the ability to use Wing just for the infrastructure piece. So basically use all these APIs, but then just bring in your own Lambda function or your own container. And we already have support for containers, which is pretty cool. We're working on some support for Lambda. And in this case, your binding between your infrastructure and your application is obviously requires a bit more work, because those things are now decoupled and not coupled together into the same language. And so to your question, if you have existing code, you can take your application code and use it, and then replace your infrastructure code with Wing. So would it be, maybe it's like Terraform or CloudFormation. So you can basically use Wing to define your infrastructure and basically point to your application code and bind it together. And then it starts running in a simulator, and you can start compiling to different cloud platforms. So yeah, it's definitely a theme that we're working on now, and we kind of have some more work to do in order to streamline this experience, because obviously we understand that most people already have some workloads, and we really do want to be able to bring them value immediately, right? Like, it doesn't mean that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's that's kind of the reason I phrased the question the way I did, because I think as a community or as an industry, maybe we're all sort of looking for that solution that says, okay, I'm down with cloud infrastructure, but that's not the solution every time. And we've talked about this already in the episode, that there's a desire to have cloud agnostic solutions. And so there's all of this legacy stuff, and it's problems that we haven't really faced before or solved before. So I think you're very early in this, and there's no path right now. You're kind of cutting your own path, as are some other people in the industry, to figure out what this looks like. And I think it's like the future of what the whole infrastructure world is going to look like a few years from now.
You're very optimistic.
I like the fact that you both laughed at me like, God, dumbass.
No, I was happy to hear that. No, obviously optimistic. I really do believe that, as an engineers, we want to solve problems. Eventually we solve them. It takes time. We need to crack the solutions, crack the business around solving those problems. Is one of the things that I'm challenged by right now is like, okay, I'm an engineer, but I actually need to build a business. I have to create like a commercial story around this, but it's all problem solving eventually. So we'll figure things out.
No, I mean, I think it's right on point, because actually last week on the episode, we were talking about the fact that there needs to be probably a compaction in the space. Like, we need to do some sort of depth first evaluation on a bunch of different things until we find one that actually solves a majority of our stack, a majority of the problems that we're having, and then sort of eliminate all of the previous examples. And so right now, we're not really sure, especially in the infrastructure deployment area. I feel like, as Will, you pointed out, we don't really know what the best answer is at this moment. And for sure, what we've got is not appropriate. Like, we can see that there's lots of churn, lots of struggle in the different areas. So I think realistically, you may actually want to start fresh with something new to examine it. There's not really another way, but Elad, as you said, it's a business, right? I think trying to capture those existing everyone has something today, likely, if they're making money in some way. So trying to do that migration is going to be a critical path forward.
Totally.
And possibly, like you were just alluding to, Warren, maybe a bit premature. Like, the first thing is to just do a new project and see what it looks like, and kind of iron out that flow, and then figure out, okay, now how do we use this to onboard all of the legacy stuff that kind of forced us to look at this problem.
Oh yeah, every company should be doing POCs with experiments. Like, I don't know, each team should be doing at least once, maybe once a month. And if they're not, then you have this extra capacity where you're not actually figuring out, how can we push our business forward with a huge step change, right? What can we do that's innovative in our space? So it doesn't really matter where it's at. The idea is, of course, experiment with something new and figure out how you can maybe use that effective in a future real business case.
Yeah. So yeah, if people are experimenting with Wing, we'd love feedback. We'd love to learn about people's use cases and what they're trying to achieve and what they like, what they don't like. More than happy to talk to anyone.
What's the time commitment look like for checking out like the Hello World version of using Wing? How long does that take to get up and running?
15 minutes, 10 minutes.
Nice.
Super quick. Super quick.
Right on.
I think you've got I don't think you said this, a whole Discord community dedicated to the project.
Yeah, it was a Slack community until last week. And so yeah, come join our new Discord. We're ramping it up, and it's been
That's just a coincidence. Has nothing to do with their policy change.
actually not. It has to do with the community just grew to a point where it was like didn't make sense financially to like support the Slack stuff.
Yeah, for sure. That gets out of control really, really quick.
Yeah.
But yeah, as you mentioned, Warren, the policy change has been the best thing to happen to Discord in years.
I mean, it's right on line because Discord wants to IPO at some point. So I feel like having those wins in their bag is important. Just need Microsoft Teams to continue on its previous path.
Yeah.
Every product has their like product name and tagline for Discord. It's going to be Discord. We're not Slack.
Yeah, I really like the playfulness and like there's some weirdness, like it takes used to definitely if you're coming from Slack, but I like the playfulness. I like all the community features, the events, it definitely feels like we've debated it when we started the community, and it was a mistake. I feel like we should have started with Discord originally.
I feel like Discord's come a long way, and probably in the last 2 years, I'm going to say, as far as like the number of features and options. But the biggest one for me has been the improvements they've made in like the onboarding experience and getting started. Because it was early on, it was a hassle to get connected, and God forbid you get a second device and have to sign in again. It's like, screw it, I'm just starting a new account.
Yeah, totally.
Or you make it through the onboarding experience and realized you did create a second account without meaning to. Cool. So anything that we should have covered that we haven't talked about yet for Wing?
No, I think you let me talk a lot.
That's my job. Give an introvert the mic and everything else works itself out. Awesome, man. Well, let's do some picks. Warren, did you bring a pick this week?
Yeah, of course, right? That's a sort of a requirement for showing
Right.
up. My pick is going to be Building Microservices by Sam Newman. So I'm going to stay on my book trend. Really, I feel like this is what converted me to personally to microservices in my career, where the advantages are, really how to think about them, how to interface between them, how to build them effectively. It's a really great book, honestly. I think still in the community, it's probably considered I don't want to say holy grail, but for sure relic that represents how to push the industry forward.
Right on. Excellent. Elad, what about you?
I'll pick the Three Body Problem. Have you had a chance to watch it?
Book
No.
or movie?
Both actually. Like I read the books a while ago, and probably one of the best science fiction series I've ever read. I really love science fiction, and this one's like the first book is a bit. I actually read the first one and only read the second one. Kind of came back to the series a few years later. It didn't for some reason it didn't want to continue. But then as you continue to read the series, it's just amazing. It's just an amazing story, and beautifully written and creative, and it goes really, really, really far. And so I think like Netflix has just released the first season, And it was so much fun to watch, especially knowing where this is going. And so highly recommend the book series and the show. And it's like, it's there's something, I think I can tell, like the kind of like the theme basically is aliens are coming in 300 years. We know that they're coming. What happens with humanity, right? Like what does this knowledge do to humanity, right? Like that's just crazy. So.
Oh, right.
You mentioned you also read a little bit, some of it.
I read the first two books and seen the show. Honestly, they're sort of like the same concept, but completely different content as far as watching or reading. Obviously, the same challenge, but they go in different directions. So you can get the same enjoyment twice by going about them. It's not really like book is better than the movie.
Yeah, which is very rare. It's very rare.
Both of them are very, very well done, for sure. I mean, I feel like you said something controversial when you said it's the best science fiction. But I don't want to get this into an argument during the pick
I
session.
said it's almost the best because to me the best is always Foundation. It's always like Asimov's.
Oh man, see, just agree to disagree there.
Okay, fair enough.
No, gloves come off. Let's go.
Oh, for sure, it's Frank Herbert's Dune, hands down, no question.
Okay. I admit I didn't read the book, so maybe I should. I know that I should.
It's like the idea of world building is so far even beyond three-body problem of how to think about it and the things that are generated in order to further the universe. Also the length of time, much more further out than even three-body problem considers.
It's not. You haven't read the last book.
So.
All right, so what I'm hearing here is Warren is going to go read the third book, and then Elad, you're going to come back on the show, and we're going to finish this out.
Yeah.
He's just trying.
I'm reading The Expanse now, which is also pretty good.
For sure, also great science fiction book. Will's just trying to get out of sharing his pick, though.
Oh no, I'm ready with a pick. Mine is it's about knife sharpening, because I did not know this was a rabbit hole I was going to go down, right? So I ended up watching Alex over on the Outdoors 55 YouTube channel on how to sharpen your knife. And he's got, do I have a complete list of his videos here? It doesn't say how, 263 videos on how to sharpen your knives. I didn't know you could talk about it that many times, but they're all like super interesting. And as a result, I bought a diamond grit sharpening stone and have been going through and sharpening all my knives. And I thought I could do a pretty decent job of sharpening my knives before, but this takes it to a whole new level, like surgical grade sharpening. And so go check out his channel. Outdoors 55 is the YouTube channel, for two reasons. One, so you can learn everything you didn't know that you needed to know about sharpening your knife, but also just like the content creation. Yeah, right. But also just like for content creation, like how do you create 263 entertaining videos about the same topic? Because he's done that. So it's actually pretty cool to check out for two reasons. And that's my pick for the week. Cool. All right. Well, thanks for joining us, Elad. This has been cool, and I'm excited about this because I really think that this is the direction our industry is going. And so it's an interesting space. There's quite a few people working on this, and so yeah, I think it's super cool. Really appreciate you taking the time to come and sit with us on the show.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, Warren, thank you. Appreciate having you here. And I guess most importantly to everyone listening, thanks for listening, because that's not really a whole lot of reason for us to do this if you're not listening.
Oh, he does it for himself.
Right. Awesome. All right. Well, it's getting awkward at this point, so I'm going to kill the stream. And Elad, thanks again, and we'll see y'all next week.